Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the latest developments in the dust-up over outdoor Calgary concerts. But first, Ottawa's eye on Alberta. Joining the Prime Minister's office this month in an advisory capacity is Morgan Breitkreutz, former Chief of Staff to Edmonton MP and Cabinet Minister Eleanor Olszewski. And according to coverage in the Globe and Mail, he will lead the Carney government's response to the October referendum vote on separation. We reached out to the office of the Prime Minister, received a statement that reads, in part, the government's focus on major projects and energy has increased the volume of engagement in the region. This work, especially around the Alberta MOU, is highly consequential, moving swiftly, necessitating more staff within the office. This role meant to provide a dedicated point person to manage engagement with external partners in Alberta. And to get a read on this role, we're joined now by Sabrina Grover, Liberal strategist, former candidate in Calgary Centre. Hello, Sabrina. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
All right, what would make this advisory role necessary that couldn't be accomplished through the actions engagement of the Carney government's own 3 current MPs here in the province?
You know, I think when you look at the overall picture of this referendum and the separation movement, like, it's not just affecting Alberta, right? It is a conversation that is affecting Canada. And I think I want to be clear, like, it's not just one question. It's 9 different questions. So there's a lot of moving parts to the referendum that I think can't just be managed by MPs who are also regularly engaging with their constituents. We also have a minister in this province who's dealing with an upcoming flood, fire, climate change, emergency management season. So I think it makes sense from the Prime Minister's perspective to have somebody dedicated in his office to have the insight into what's happening on the ground, not just on separation, but on all of the additional 9 questions, which include constitutional changes. They include different things that the province of Alberta would like to see, more responsibility or more taking over of. And so I think it's important to have that really dynamic conversation right in the PMO.
The individual himself, as a veteran Liberal organizer, how much of a power player is Morgan Breitkreutz? What does he bring to the table?
Well, I think Morgan is certainly a very well-versed Albertan and somebody who has experience across the province. And I think that that's what makes him valuable. Having led campaigns in this province before, it's challenging if you bring just an urban viewpoint or if you bring, just a Calgary or Edmonton viewpoint to this role. And I think one of the things Morgan brings is an overall picture and perspective of the province. And I think that's so important because you are seeing very many regional differences within the province in terms of how the question about separation is going, but also some of these constitutional questions. We also saw a water not coal petition get the right number of signatures, but not get on the referendum ballot. So that's also adding an additional kind of layer to some of these conversations. I think Morgan has that experience and is the right person to be in this role with the Prime Minister's office.
The Globe and Mail, to follow its coverage, refers to him as a quarterback on the separation issue. For that particular element, what kind of role do you see him playing there? What might that role involve?
Well, one of the things that I think the Prime Minister's office is likely considering, both with Alberta and Quebec, both discussing sovereignty movements at this time, although Alberta, again, as I mentioned, having a much more in-depth conversation about constitutional changes, is how does this affect our external perception and sort of the external investments or trade deals or negotiations that we're courting, right? In the last 2 weeks, you've seen the Prime Minister travel across Europe, lead one of the biggest missions into Japan on the defense file, as well as trade. We're, as a country, courting a significant amount of external investment and trade deals with Canada. At the same time, inside Canada, we're having 2 separate conversations about provinces that want to leave the country. And I think that is a significant economic impact, right? I mean, even if you look at the Calgary Chamber's release or some of the data that came out of them earlier this week, 8 in 10 say that this is a bad idea. It's negatively affecting the economy. 1 in 3 Alberta jobs is tied to the Canadian economy, again, reflecting that national trade economy, the national trade interest. And, 48% of members members of the Calgary Chamber said that they would leave Alberta if this happened. That's a significant economic impact for the province and for the country. And so I think from the Prime Minister's perspective, they're trying to manage some of these economic issues both domestically, but also what the public perception is globally as we court all of these like global investments.
How do you see the government's response to all this playing out through the summer months? Should Albertans expect to see more government members on the ground here in the province, if not the Prime Minister himself?
Calgary Stampede is coming up, so I imagine there's going to be a number of folks in town for that, and then maybe up to Edmonton for K-Days. Although I'm a Calgarian, Michael, so I'm more supportive of the Stampede. But I think that the three MPs that we have here, especially Corey Hogan, has really, really been the voice of Liberals in Alberta. And I think that makes sense, right? It's somebody who's reflecting the Alberta experience, somebody who's lived here, worked here. And I think you'll see the same from Mark Carney. I think at the same time, Prime Minister Carney is dealing with a lot of these issues around the Memorandum of Understanding, the energy projects, and the potential pipeline. And so that will play into that. But I think, again, having this person in PMO helps guide some of those conversations and helps prevent things from blowing up. And I think that that's the most important part of this is we need to keep a calm, steady hand. There's lots of interest groups in Alberta themselves doing some of the pushback on the separation. Apparently also the Premier and Pierre Poilievre, though I guess we'll see more from them what kind of campaign they're running. But I think that there's a lot happening, and I think it's just as important for the Prime Minister's office to pay attention to the dynamics.
Okay, maybe as a final question, and you brought up the MOU a moment ago, the July 1st deadline for the Smith government to submit its pipeline plan, obviously rapidly approaching, but anything to read in that regard by way of the senior advisor appointment?
I don't think so. I think they're really, operating in their own veins and operating in two separate parallels that are overlapping, but not necessarily the same. I think we've seen the Premier be really clear about her intent. And I think we've seen the Premier be really clear about courting proponents. And I think that's the biggest question is, does the July submission come with clear proponents, or what are the conditions attached to getting a proponent involved? Because that seems to be the real stalling point here in terms of getting a pipeline built.
All right. We'll have to leave it there for time. As always, appreciate your time, Sabrina. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sabrina Grover, Liberal strategist, former candidate in Calgary Centre. From a new Alberta advisor to the Prime Minister and his staff to the ever-developing dust-up over outdoor concerts in Calgary. Time now for tonight's politics panel, and joining us this evening, former MLA and Cabinet Minister Marg McCuaig-Boyd, and John Santos is a political analyst. Good evening to you both, and let's begin with the Prime Minister's office bringing in a new Alberta advisor. Morgan Breitkreutz is a former Chief of Staff to Edmonton MP and Cabinet Minister Eleanor Olszewski, and according to the PMO, will be dedicated point person managing engagement with external partners in Alberta as the government focuses on major projects in energy, especially around the Alberta MOU. According to the Globe and Mail, Breitkreutz will also lead the Carney government's response to the October referendum on separation. Mark, having been in government, having engaged with federal counterparts, what kind of lens can you give on the need for an advisory role of this nature in the PMO?
Well, I think it's pretty important that one person is given that job to be the point person. And the MPs are pretty busy with a lot of other things. So I think it's a good move on Prime Minister Carney's part to appoint somebody who only has a focus on those two super important issues as we go forward.
John, to what degree do you see this being related to the fall referendum and a need for someone to quarterback the response of the federal government?
I think that's exactly why this is happening. And it's quite interesting to see sort of inside baseball kind of news reported like this. And as Mark pointed out, politicians are very busy. Their staffers are also very busy. And so unless you pull somebody, you tap a dedicated resource that's going to devote all of their time and energy to addressing the upcoming separation referendum, really the all all of the 10 referendum questions that's happening, you're not going to have somebody taking charge of that. And if we go back in history, this is, appointing somebody to lead the charge on a referendum is one of the things that the federal Liberals did in 1995 that they didn't really have in the previous federal referendums that happened before that. And so I think this is showing some of the learning that's happened over the years of the importance of appointing somebody to lead the charge, but somebody who also has experience and can speak to the particularities of Alberta in all of its different regions and forms and subpopulations and that sort of thing.
Mark, I know you both have spoken to the fact that MPs are quite busy in their capacity, but surprised this role isn't more on the shoulders of one of those three existing Alberta Liberal MPs, including Matt Genereux, who many will recall when he crossed the floor from the Conservatives, was immediately named by the Prime Minister a special advisor on economic and security partnerships.
Yeah, I think going back to they're very busy, but all three of them are also from either Edmonton or Calgary, and I think it's important to have somebody who can speak rural or talk to rural Albertans and understand Alberta and the two divisions really that we have between urban and rural. So I'm sure Matt is going to be speaking very closely and working very closely with Morgan, but I think having him dedicated, and his resume says that he'll be able to talk to all Albertans and understand the culture, and I think that's really important.
John, politicians of all stripes have long made a beeline for Stampede. How important will it be for the Carney government to have an elevated, not just a presence, but an elevated presence this time around?
I think it will be very important. There are going to be many discussions happening during the Calgary Stampede, but really all throughout the summer, like rodeo, festival, and concert circuit. There's a lot of FaceTime networking, behind-the-scenes conversations that happens there, and that's going to be very important to bring a lot of different civil society groups on side with really both campaigns. And so I think, both the yes side and the no side are going to be, pulling out all the stops during the summer festival circuit.
Marg, on the Stampede side, I seem to recall you had quite a presence as a cabinet minister. What would you expect? What would you expect of the Carney government this time around, given whatever's happening with the pipeline, given all that's happening with the referendum?
Yeah, as John said, there's a lot of business gets done at Stampede, and they're very long days. Mine would start at 6:30 or 7 in the morning and go till maybe 10:30 at night, going to events, but also having meetings. And it's the perfect opportunity. I think we'll see a heightened presence from the federal government. However, they usually do have a big showing during Stampede because everybody's there and a lot of work gets done that people don't realize behind the scenes. So I would hope we have a huge presence from the federal government.
John, Stampede follows the July 1st deadline for Alberta to submit its formal proposal for a new West Coast pipeline to the Major Projects Office in Calgary. With this new advisor on board, should that also be taken as a sign of likely movement on the pipeline front?
Possibly. I mean, if we've learned anything about deadlines and like all of these major projects and specifically the Alberta-Ottawa MOU, it's kind of like deadlines in graduate school. Like they don't really matter. You just keep pushing things forward. So, I think having somebody who's sort of focusing their efforts on these things is going to be helpful. It is a signal that they're taking it seriously. But there's a lot of moving parts with the MOU and really with all of these major project deals. And so I think we have to understand that we're in a very complex political, economic, social climate right now. And big deals, big projects take a lot of time to get going.
Marg, as a former energy minister, surprised how quiet it has been of late on progress or developments around the proposed pipeline. Not a lot being said by either the Smith or Carney governments with that July 1st deadline rapidly approaching.
I'm actually not surprised. I think there's probably a lot of discussions and a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but nobody wants to show their cards till July 1st. But as John said, there's lots of things in play, so it's not going to be an easy project to put forward. However, as long as progress can be shown, I think that's what people should be looking for. And I think this new position could be helpful in managing some of the things that need to happen between the two governments.
All right. Time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, the cancellation of Country Thunder and how it factors into fireworks at Calgary City Hall. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. It has been a week of controversy and contention over outdoor concerts in Calgary. First with disagreements between City Council and the Cowboys Music Festival, and now with the last-minute cancellation of Country Thunder.
It's pretty much impossible to operate an event of this magnitude with these restrictions in place. 75 decibels, it's the volume of a vacuum cleaner or a loud conversation, and we bring really big artists onto a really big stage, and we just can't operate with those noise levels.
If this was a major problem for months and months and months, why did they say 2 days ago it wasn't an issue?
Country Thunder blames the music decibel level reduction. It also cites area construction, reducing traffic and limiting access to the concert area, accusing the city of creating safety and operational barriers while insisting ticket sales did not play a factor. John, you're in Calgary. How does this Country Thunder situation play in the wake of the huge political spat over the Cowboys concerts that saw the mayor and council under considerable pressure from provincial and federal conservatives, the premier and Pierre Poilievre included?
Yeah, I'd posit that people's responses to either side are almost entirely driven by their personal politics and not any kind of practical considerations. Look, for anyone who's been following the concert scene for the last few years, they haven't been doing well, right? There was sort of a joke before that a lot of artists would sort of get sick last minute and have to cancel shows, and coincidentally those shows where the artists got sick happened to be the ones where they were struggling to sell tickets, right? So it's sort of become the equivalent of dead grandmothers during exam season at universities, and there's a lot of speculation online that this is mostly driven by ticket sales. And in fact, some of the promotional materials for Country Thunder were talking about giving away $100 food, drink, and merchandise vouchers for people who were buying tickets. So, I find it difficult to believe. And I'm not saying that it's not difficult or that they haven't faced challenges. I work in Inglewood, and so on my way to work, I go by all of the construction. And honestly, in terms of impediments, that's probably the bigger challenge that they're facing, rather than any kind of noise restrictions, which didn't even apply to Country Thunder. All the noise controversy was applying to the other festival in the west end of downtown Calgary. So yeah, this whole thing is just kind of comical, if you ask me.
Well, Marg, and obviously you're someone who's on the outside looking in. You don't spend all your time in Calgary, but how much of an impact do you see this Country Thunder cancellation having on this larger clash with Calgary City Hall?
I don't think in the end it's going to be a big thing. Stampede's coming. I think, what hasn't been mentioned a lot is they changed the time. They used to hold this in August. They're holding it right ahead of Stampede. And I think it's more, people are looking at the money they have to spend. Do they spend it on one festival, just Stampede, or do they spend their money at Stampede? So I think that maybe is part of it. Yeah, I don't know the traffic thing. That certainly can be annoying. But yeah, the noise bylaw didn't apply to them. And honestly, I think if it was sold out concert, it would have been held. So I think despite what they say, I saw the same things John was mentioning, efforts to sell tickets, and they're heading into a pretty rainy weekend, so they're not going to get walk-in traffic. So I think it was a business decision based on that. and using the city to blame.
Okay, John, now what's to be made of how the mayor continues to respond? Jeremy Farkas does not appear to be giving any ground, backing off his very vocal and we can say at times very colorful stance.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different view than Marg on this, and I think this is sort of portending to how the future of the relationship between the city of Calgary and the government of Alberta, and particularly Mayor Jeremy Farkas and Premier Danielle Smith, will unfold. And part of this is because, you know, the Smith government has cozied up a surprising amount to the feds, and I mean that's very understandable to get the MOU and all of that stuff moving. And so the classic winning strategy for Alberta political leaders is to find an external threat and to beat up on them and say, hey, look, I'm defending Alberta's interests. And so Jeremy Farkas can be painted as like this, you know, woke fun police target for the Smith government. And sort of on the flip side of that, clashes between municipalities and the provincial government over, you know, long-term predictable sustainable funding, you know, education property tax, all of those things are perennial issues. And so I can see the mayor's office and Mayor Farkas himself wanting to sort of draw a line in the sand saying, like, look, you can't just push us around on everything. And so I sort of see this as a continuation of this prelude of potentially prickly relations between Mayor Farkas and Premier Smith.
Well, and Marg, as recently as Wednesday, the Premier's office continued to call for stakeholders to come together, find a way for events to continue with the countdown on to Stampede. Do you see a point where Danielle Smith does step in, overrides Calgary City Council to satisfy the demands of concert organizers?
Well, I take John's points. That's certainly true. There's been a lot of back and forth with municipalities. Personally, I think she'd be ill-advised to do that. There's a lot of other serious things going on in Alberta that should demand her attention. You know, up here in Alberta, we've had water issues the last week, and there's been no statement from her on that. So, having said that, she may step in, but I think it would be ill-advised on her part, and she should mention to some more serious things.
John, last 30 seconds or so to you. What degree of political risk would you see coming with the Smith government potentially stepping in? How would you see that going over with Calgarians, with Albertans?
I mean, as Mark said, like there's a lot of risk to that, right? Like, if she continues to, I understand that municipalities aren't like technically, legally orders of government, right? But if the province decides to sort of flex its de jure power over municipalities and override things that are, should be their jurisdiction, I mean, that kind of takes away the moral legitimacy of them saying, well, the Fed shouldn't intrude into our jurisdiction, right? And so it puts them in this contradictory position of fighting for sort of provincial rights against, federal overreach when they're intruding on municipal areas and using provincial overreach.
All right. We're out of time. Have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, John.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News about separation debate causing businesses to think of leaving Alberta, as we heard in our conversation with the Calgary Chamber of Commerce on Wednesday. And Tina starts it off with, well, yeah, do you think a business wants to shrink its accessible market? Perry's skeptical, posting, name one business that will actually leave, and when it does, let's see how long it takes corporations to fill that void. Post-Truth Era weighs in with Liberal policies have been driving business and investments out of Canada for years now. Fib notes, geology can't pack up and leave. And Liz asks, can we just get some stability and get on with it? Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, what's at stake with July 1st deadlines rapidly approaching for Alberta's pipeline application? And on the CUSMA front, we'll hear from the head of the Canada West Foundation on Friday. Until then, Have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.